I hadn't planned to stay that long. It was supposed to be a quick visit, 2 nights in the city, a bit of hiking with my cousin, and then back to my usual routine. But from the moment I stepped into his uncle's apartment, I knew the weekend wouldn't go how I expected. The place felt lived in but calm. Big windows, quiet corners, a skyline that looked more like a painting than something real. The kind of space that made you lower your voice without meaning to. Michael, my cousin's uncle, greeted me at the door with a soft smile. He was older than I imagined, mid-40s maybe, but not in a tired way. He carried himself like someone who had grown comfortable with silence. His voice was low, a little rough, the kind that made you listen more carefully. "Make yourself at home," he said, stepping aside. I remember the faint scent of coffee and rain that drifted in as I passed him. My cousin Leo was already tossing his bag on the couch, chatting about the hike they had planned for the morning. I nodded along, trying not to stare at the way Michael leaned against the kitchen counter, one hand wrapped around a mug, eyes moving between us like he was measuring something invisible. We ate takeout that night, noodles from a place downstairs, and talked about small things. Music, the city, work. But every time I looked up, Michael was watching me with that same quiet curiosity. Not like he was judging, not even interested, just seeing. It was disarming. Later, when Leo started yawning and talking about their early start, Michael glanced at me and asked if I'd be okay staying behind. "I'm not much of a hiker anymore," he admitted, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Knees decided I've done enough exploring." "I'll be fine," I said. Truthfully, I didn't mind. Something about the apartment, about him, felt oddly peaceful. Leo went to bed early. The city outside softened into hums and headlights. I lingered in the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone but really just existing there. Michael was sitting across from me reading something on his laptop, glasses sliding down his nose. Every now and then he'd glance up, not a stare, not quite, just enough to make my breath catch when our eyes met. He asked about my work, the half-finished projects, the feeling of being lost in my 20s, the quiet uncertainty that sits in your chest when everyone else seems to have it figured out. Most people brush it off when I talk like that. But he didn't. He listened, nodded, said, "It doesn't go away entirely. You just get better at walking alongside it." I didn't know what to say to that. It was too honest. So instead, I smiled and asked him how long he'd lived here. 8 years, he said. "I moved in after my partner and I split. Thought I'd only stay a year, but I guess I liked the view." He smiled faintly, but his eyes drifted to the window as he said it, and I could tell it wasn't really about the skyline. After a while, the rain started again. Light at first, then steady. The sound filled the room in a way that made silence feel alive. Michael closed his laptop and leaned back. "You can turn the TV on if you want," he said softly. "I don't mind the quiet," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked. It wasn't the kind of gaze you could explain. It felt like he was searching for something, not in a way that made me nervous but in a way that made me seen. My chest tightened and I had to look away first. We sat like that for a long time. Two people who barely knew each other, breathing the same still air. When I finally stood to go to bed, Michael spoke, his voice low enough to almost disappear under the rain. "Good night, Alex." I turned back. "Good night." But he was still looking at me when I said it, that soft, unreadable look, and I didn't know why it felt like the night had just shifted into something else entirely. As I lay in the guest room later, listening to the rain against the window, my mind kept replaying that moment. The calm in his voice. The warmth in his eyes. There was nothing overtly strange about it, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the air between us had changed. It wasn't attraction exactly. It was quieter than that. Something like recognition. Like two people who didn't expect to find each other, suddenly realizing they had. And maybe it meant nothing. But as I drifted off to sleep, I caught myself wondering, if it really was nothing, why did it already feel like too much? The next morning was slow and blue-gray, like the city hadn't fully decided to wake up yet. The sound of rain was softer, distant, not quite gone, just hovering somewhere above the skyline. I found Michael already in the kitchen, barefoot, making coffee. The smell hit before I saw him, strong, familiar, grounding. He looked up when I entered, offered a quiet morning, and slid a mug across the counter toward me. "Thanks," I said, my voice still heavy with sleep. For a few minutes, neither of us said much. Just the sound of coffee being poured, rain tapping the glass, the occasional creak of the floorboards. It wasn't awkward though. It felt safe. Like silence didn't need to be filled when he was around. Leo texted, Michael said finally. "They're staying one more night out there. Some trail they want to finish." "Oh." I tried to sound casual. So it's just us again. He glanced up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Seems that way. We sat at the small table by the window, watching the city wake in shades of silver. I asked him about his work, the sketches spread across the counter, the notebooks half open. He told me he used to design public spaces, parks, libraries, but lately he'd been taking fewer projects, focusing more on things that don't require approval from committees. Like what? I asked. He smiled softly. Things that are allowed to stay unfinished. There was something in the way he said it that made me stop stirring my coffee. Like he wasn't talking about drawings anymore. He must have noticed the look on my face because he changed the subject. Asked if I wanted to walk to the corner bakery once the rain eased up. I said yes, mostly because it gave me an excuse not to sit there wondering what he meant. We spent the afternoon quietly. A short walk a few blocks through wet streets. The world smelled like rain and bread. When we got back, Michael disappeared into his office for a while, and I wandered the apartment like a museum. Shelves full of books, framed photos of landscapes I didn't recognize, a small record player humming softly in the corner. At some point I found him sitting by the window again, sketching. The light was fading, spilling across his face in soft amber. He didn't hear me come in. His brow was furrowed in concentration, lips parted slightly, one hand resting against his cheek. I should have turned away. It felt too intimate to watch him like that. But I didn't. He must have sensed me eventually because he looked up, and for a second neither of us moved. The moment stretched thin between us. His pencil hung in midair, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a hand pressed against my chest. Then he smiled, small and knowing. Caught me zoning out? Something like that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He gestured toward the sketchbook. Want to see? I crossed the room slowly, pretending I wasn't nervous. The drawing was of the city, rooftops and streets in loose, confident lines. But there was something else in it too. A warmth I couldn't name. It's beautiful, I said. He shrugged. It's practice. For what? He looked at me, then eyes soft. For remembering what things feel like. That silenced me. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, it was full of things I couldn't say. He turned back to the window and I stayed beside him, close enough to feel the heat from his shoulder through my sleeve. We didn't talk for a long time. We didn't need to. Outside, the rain started again, faint and rhythmic. The apartment seemed smaller somehow, or maybe just closer. When the light finally faded, Michael stood and stretched, rubbing at his neck. You hungry? Not really, I said. You? He smiled faintly. Always. We made something simple, toast, soup, the kind of dinner that didn't need talking. The sound of the rain filled the spaces between us. Later, as I rinsed the dishes, I felt him pass behind me, close enough that the air shifted. My skin prickled with awareness. I could feel his presence even after he'd stepped away. That night, before I went to bed, I caught his reflection in the window, sitting on the couch, reading again, a soft light warming the edges of his face. I almost said something. I don't know what. But instead I just stood there watching him. Something about the quiet between us wasn't just quiet anymore. It was charged like a held breath. And in that silence, the kind that made my chest ache and my thoughts stumble, I realized how much I wanted him to break it. Or maybe how much I wanted to. When I woke the next morning, the apartment was already filled with light. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the air washed clean and soft. I could hear my cousin moving around the kitchen, Michael's voice low and steady in reply. By the time I joined them, they were packing for the hike. Boots by the door, rain jackets, the usual chatter. I poured myself some coffee and tried to shake off the strange weight I'd carried from the night before. Michael looked up from tying a strap on a backpack. You're sure you don't want to come? I shook my head. I'll just slow you down. He smiled, a small curve that didn't reach his eyes. I doubt that. Leo clapped me on the shoulder and promised to be back by nightfall. Then they were gone, the door closing, the echo of footsteps down the hall fading until the apartment went still again. For a long minute I just stood there, mug in hand, listening to the silence they left behind. The air felt different without them. Or maybe I just noticed it now, how large the space was and how small I felt inside it. Michael came back into the room, hands tucked in his pockets. Guess it's just us. Guess so, I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. The day stretched quietly. We moved around each other like two people sharing the same orbit, never colliding but always aware of the other's gravity. At noon, clouds rolled back in and rain began again, heavier this time. I watched it from the balcony door, coffee cup warm in my hands. Michael joined me, leaning against the frame. The light caught the silver in his hair. He didn't say anything, just looked out at the skyline, the city half lost behind the mist. I kind of like it like this, he murmured. Rain? He nodded. Makes everything honest. We ended up cooking lunch together. It started because I offered to help, but there was something quietly domestic about the way it happened. He cut vegetables while I stirred the pan. Our shoulders brushed when we reached for things. We laughed once, I don't even remember why, and the sound lingered like a secret in the air. At one point he leaned past me to grab a plate, his arm grazing my back. Just a second of contact, but it sent a spark through me so sudden I almost dropped the spoon. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and pretended not to. We ate in the living room, plates balanced on our knees, watching the rain blur the world outside. At some point the conversation shifted to music, then to old movies. Michael suggested one, some quiet 90s drama I'd never heard of. We found it online, dimmed the lights and let the movie fill the silence. About halfway through, a chill crept in from the windows. Without a word, he reached behind him and pulled a blanket from the couch. He draped it across both our legs, an unconscious, almost parental gesture, but my heartbeat didn't get the memo. I could feel the warmth from his arm beside mine. The faint brush of fabric where our sleeves touched. The way he exhaled slowly when the movie went quiet. It wasn't a big thing. But it wasn't nothing. When the credits rolled, neither of us moved. The city lights outside flickered against the glass and for a long moment we just sat there. Michael finally turned his head. What did you think? It was good, I said. Sad. He smiled faintly. Sad can be good. Something about the way he said it made my throat tighten. He stood, stretched, and began to gather the plates. I offered to help, but he waved me off, saying, I've got it. When he walked past me, his hand brushed my shoulder, barely there, but my skin remembered it long after he was gone. That night, I lay awake again, the city hum leaking in through the window. I could hear him moving somewhere down the hall, pacing maybe, or just restless like I was. I thought about how his voice had softened when he spoke to me, how the air between us felt charged without meaning to be. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into quiet gestures and borrowed warmth. But then I remembered the way his hand had rested, just for a second, on the back of the couch when he leaned toward me, how close it had come to mine, and how neither of us had pulled away. And I couldn't stop thinking about how something that small could feel so big. Maybe it was loneliness, or maybe it was just human, the kind of nearness that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. But lying there in the dark, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening between us, it wasn't nothing. And the thought of that both terrified and comforted me in the same breath. The rain turned heavier again that evening, the kind that erases the city outside the windows. We dimmed the lights without even talking about it. Bright light felt like it would break something fragile that had formed between us. Michael opened a bottle of wine, one of those dusty ones people keep for years waiting for a reason. He poured 2 glasses, slid one toward me and said, I think a day like this qualifies. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, knees drawn up, the movie on mute, the rain and the soft clink of our glasses filling the space instead. The warmth from the wine spread slowly, loosening whatever invisible line had been keeping us apart. You always this quiet? He asked after a while, not unkindly. Only when I'm comfortable, I said. He gave a small smile at that. Good answer. I asked him what he missed most about being younger. He thought about it for a long time before answering. Thinking I still had time to figure out who I was, he said finally. I didn't know what to do with that kind of honesty, so I just nodded. Maybe we never stopped trying. Maybe. His eyes softened, meeting mine. You talk like someone who's already lived 2 lives. I laughed quietly. Just feels that way some days. The thunder came without warning, sharp, echoing. The lights flickered once, twice. I startled, spilling a little wine on my hand. Before I could reach for a napkin, Michael's hand closed gently around mine. Careful, he said. His thumb brushed over the place where the wine had splashed, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. It was nothing, barely a touch, but it hit somewhere deeper than it should have. He must have felt it too. I saw it in the way his breath caught. He let go first. Sorry, he murmured, eyes dropping to the floor. I shook my head. Don't be. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick, alive. I could hear the rain, the faint hum of the refrigerator, my own pulse. Sometimes, he said quietly, I forget what it's like to have someone else here. You mean living alone? He nodded. It's peaceful. But it can trick you into thinking you don't need anyone. Something in my chest pulled tight. I wanted to say I understood, but the words stayed behind my teeth. Instead, I reached for his empty glass. Our fingers brushed again, softer this time, like we were both testing the edges of a language we didn't yet know. He didn't pull away. I don't remember how much longer we sat there like that. Long enough for the thunder to move off into the distance, for the wine to run low, for the tension to turn into something quiet and aching. When the clock on the wall clicked past midnight, Michael yawned, and I realized how tired he looked, eyelids heavy, shoulders slumped. "You should get some sleep," I said. "So should you." He smiled faintly. He stayed where he was, though, half curled on the couch, the blanket bunched beside him. I stood, took the blanket, and draped it over him. His eyes opened just enough to meet mine. "Thanks," he whispered, voice rough from exhaustion. I hesitated, hands still on the edge of the blanket. "You're welcome." For a second I thought he'd already drifted off. Then his hand lifted, slow, almost uncertain, and brushed against mine where it rested on the fabric. A small, warm touch that lingered longer than it needed to. Time thinned. The city noise faded. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. The touch stayed, barely there but steady, like a promise neither of us was brave enough to name. When I finally pulled my hand back, he exhaled softly, eyes still half closed. I stood there for a moment, watching him breathe. The way the light from the window traced his face. The faint rise and fall of his chest beneath the blanket. Something inside me shifted then, quiet but irreversible. It wasn't desire exactly. It was deeper, older. Like recognizing a melody you'd forgotten you knew. I went to my room, but I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that touch again. Simple, human, impossible to ignore. When I finally drifted off near dawn, I dreamed of standing in the same room, rain outside, the same stillness between us, but this time I wasn't afraid to reach back. And even after I woke, the feeling stayed. The touch stayed. When I woke, light was spilling through the blinds, thin and gold, catching dust in the air. The storm had finally passed. The apartment felt different, warmer somehow, like the rain had rinsed away the tension but left something softer behind. I could hear the low shuffle of movement in the kitchen. Cupboards opening, water running, the faint clatter of a pan. "Michael." I pulled on a sweatshirt and followed the smell of toast. He was at the stove making eggs, hair still messy from sleep. He looked up when I came in and smiled in that quiet way of his. "Morning." "Morning," I echoed. We talked about nothing, the weather, coffee, how the city smelled after rain. But every word felt like walking a narrow bridge. My heart was still caught somewhere between the night before and the moment his hand had touched mine. He set a plate in front of me, then sat across the table. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable this time, it was waiting for something. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" he asked. I shook my head. "You?" "Not really." He hesitated, eyes lowering to his cup. "I kept thinking about yesterday." The air shifted. I swallowed. "Yeah." He exhaled, slow. "I don't want to make things strange. If I crossed a line." "You didn't." My voice came out too fast. "You didn't." He looked up then, eyes searching mine. "You sure?" I nodded. But the word sure didn't feel big enough for what I meant. I wanted to tell him that the touch had stayed with me all night, that it had filled the space between every heartbeat. Instead I just said, it didn't feel wrong. Something in his face softened, almost like relief. "Good," he murmured. Then quieter, "because it didn't feel wrong to me either." Neither of us moved for a long time. The sounds of the city, car horns, footsteps, someone calling to a dog down the street, came and went beyond the window, but they felt distant. "I don't even know what this is," I said finally. "Maybe we don't have to," he replied. "Maybe it's enough that it feels real." Real. The word sat between us like a fragile thing. He reached for his cup, but his hand trembled slightly and he set it down again. "You should be out with people your age," he said softly. "Not sitting here with me on a Saturday morning. I'm exactly where I want to be." That stopped him. His eyes met mine, and whatever he was about to say dissolved before it reached his mouth. The air thickened. I could hear both our breathing. He leaned back slightly, rubbed the back of his neck. "You have a way of making simple things sound dangerous." "Maybe they just are," I said, almost whispering. A faint smile touched his lips. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I'll believe you." We sat there in the kind of silence that feels like standing on a cliff edge. One small step and everything changes. Finally he pushed back his chair, stood and walked to the window. The morning light wrapped around him, soft, forgiving. I followed, not sure what I was doing until I was beside him. He turned, and I was close enough to see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell. For a heartbeat, neither of us looked away. Then he reached up, slowly giving me time to move if I wanted to, and brushed his fingers against my temple, tucking a strand of hair back. His hand lingered there warm against my cheek. I felt myself leaning into it without meaning to. "Michael," I breathed. He shook his head gently. "You don't have to say anything." "I want to," I said. "I just don't know what it is yet." His thumb traced the edge of my jaw, a gesture so small it barely existed, but it felt like the whole room shifted with it. "Maybe we don't name it," he whispered. "Maybe we just let it be." I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of coffee and rain still clinging to him. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even a promise. It was something quieter, an understanding. When he dropped his hand, the space between us pulsed with everything we hadn't said. We stood there until the light grew brighter, almost harsh. Then he smiled, half apologetic, half content. "You should write this morning off as a strange dream." I smiled back. "If it is, I'm not sure I want to wake up." He laughed softly at that, turned back to the window. The sound eased something inside me. And for the first time in years I didn't feel lost. The rain had cleared for good by late afternoon. When I opened the window, a breeze moved through the apartment, cool, carrying the smell of wet pavement and coffee from the cafe below. The city sounded alive again, buses groaning, people laughing somewhere down the block. Michael was at the table, reading. His glasses had slipped halfway down his nose, and the light fell across his face in stripes. For a moment I just watched him, wondering how something so ordinary could feel like gravity. He looked up. "You hungry?" "Always," I said, and he smiled that small, familiar smile. We walked to a corner market, the sidewalk still shining from the rain. The world felt slow and kind. He bought tomatoes, bread, basil. I carried the paper bag on the way back. We didn't talk much, but our hands brushed once and neither of us apologized. Back in the kitchen, the evening slid quietly around us. Music played from a speaker, some low jazz piano that fit the hour. We moved in rhythm without planning it. I chopped, he stirred. His shoulder would bump mine and linger just a little longer each time. "This is nicer than eating out," he said. "Cheaper too." He laughed, soft and easy. Practical and charming. Dangerous combination. We ate by the window, watching the city change color. The buildings turned gold, then violet, then a darker shade of blue that made the lights seem warmer. "Do you ever get used to being alone?" I asked quietly. He thought for a while before answering. "You learn to make peace with it. But that's not the same as getting used to it." I nodded, tracing the rim of my glass. I think I was waiting for something to start. I just didn't know what. He looked at me then, eyes soft behind the glasses. "Maybe this is it." The words hung between us, almost weightless. After dinner, we cleaned up together, and it felt like we'd been doing it for years. The quiet passing of plates, the soft knock of cutlery, our voices low and tired in a pleasant way. When the last dish was stacked, Michael leaned against the counter, folding a towel absently in his hands. "You ever think about how simple it can be?" he asked. "What?" Feeling understood. He looked down, a small smile tugging at his mouth. I didn't think I'd find that again. I stepped closer, close enough to smell soap and the faint scent of wine on his shirt. "You did," I said. He met my eyes, and for once there wasn't any hesitation. He reached out, slow as a question, and brushed his knuckles along my arm. My skin lit up like it remembered something ancient. "Alex," he said quietly, "you don't have to." "I want to," I interrupted. My voice trembled, but not from fear. He let out a breath, something between relief and disbelief. His hand found mine, fingers fitting like they'd always been meant to. We didn't move for a long time. The music had stopped. All that was left was the hum of the city outside and the steady rhythm of our breathing. Later we ended up by the window again, standing shoulder to shoulder. The glass reflected us faintly, two figures not quite touching but close enough to blur together. The lights below flickered across his face, painting him in gold. I felt him glance sideways. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd be here, like this. Not with anyone." "Me neither." "Does it scare you?" "Yeah," I admitted. "But in the best way." He smiled at that, then looked out again. I don't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. I only know that 1 second we were standing side by side, and the next my head was resting against his shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His hand came up, rested lightly at the back of my neck, a slow, reassuring weight. We stayed that way while the city dimmed completely, until the windows turned black and our reflections disappeared. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a beginning or an ending. It was something in between, steady, quiet, real. When he finally whispered, "You okay?" I nodded against him. Yeah, I said. I think I've been waiting for this. His thumb brushed the back of my hand. Me too. The night stretched on unhurried. We talked a little, about books, about nothing, and somewhere in that space I realized that whatever this was didn't need a name. It just needed to be felt. When I finally went to bed, the apartment was still and calm. Through the wall, I could hear him moving once, maybe checking the locks, maybe just breathing. The sound eased me in a way I hadn't felt in years. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought kept circling in my head, soft and certain. I hadn't been waiting for a person or even for love. I'd been waiting to feel this kind of quiet, and to find someone who wanted to share it. Morning came slowly. I woke to the pale light of dawn spilling across the ceiling, to the muted sound of the city beginning its day. Somewhere below, a car door slammed, and a street vendor called out in a voice that sounded half asleep. For a moment I didn't move. The air still carried the warmth of the night before, coffee, rain, and the faint scent of him. When I stepped into the living room, Michael was already up, barefoot, wearing the same worn gray t-shirt from yesterday. He was at the counter, pouring water into the kettle, his movements slow, easy. Morning, he said without turning. Hey, I murmured. He handed me a mug as if it were a language we already spoke. I leaned against the counter beside him, both of us half facing the window where the sunrise bled into the skyline. It wasn't awkward anymore. The silence between us had changed shape. It wasn't something to escape, but something to rest in. He broke it first. You heading back to your cousin's place today? Yeah, I said. They're coming back from the trail this afternoon. He nodded, eyes fixed on the city. You'll tell them we had a quiet weekend? I smiled. Quiet enough. He laughed, a soft, tired sound that warmed me all the way through. For a while we just stood there, sipping coffee, watching the sunlight slide down the sides of the buildings. I kept thinking about the past few days, the way it had unfolded without warning, the way it had felt both fragile and inevitable. I wanted to ask him what it meant, what came next. But even as the thought formed, I realized it didn't need an answer. Maybe that was the point. He turned then, leaning his hip against the counter, studying me. You're quiet this morning? Just thinking. About? I hesitated. About how strange it feels, to feel so calm about something that should probably confuse me. He smiled a little. Maybe it's not strange. Maybe it's just right. His words settled between us, gentle and certain. I watched the light trace the lines of his face, the small wrinkles near his eyes, the faint scar along his jaw. There was something deeply human in him, something that made me feel safe just standing near. I don't know what happens next, I admitted. He nodded. Neither do I. Does that scare you? He thought about it. A little. But I think I'd rather be scared than closed off. I looked down at my mug, at the tiny spiral of steam fading into the air. I think I was closed off for a long time. I know, he said quietly. So was I. He reached out then, slowly, deliberately, and rested his hand over mine where it sat on the counter. The gesture was simple, unassuming, but it felt like a promise made in a language too old for words. Neither of us looked away. I don't want to label it, I said finally. I just don't want to pretend it didn't happen. You don't have to pretend, he said. Whatever this becomes, that's what it's meant to be. The phrase echoed in my chest. Whatever this becomes. It didn't sound like uncertainty anymore. It sounded like permission. We stood there, holding on just long enough for the moment to imprint itself, then he let go, moving toward the window. The city looks different in the morning, he said. Yeah, I said. Like it's forgiving. He smiled at that, and for a second I wanted to tell him everything, the way I'd been feeling since the first time he looked at me, how I hadn't expected kindness to feel like this, how it had quietly rearranged the shape of my world. But instead I walked over to him and we just looked out together. The street below was waking up. A kid on a skateboard, a woman walking her dog, the slow rhythm of another day beginning. You ever wish you could pause it right here? I asked. He glanced sideways. Every day. The light hit his face at just the right angle, turning his eyes a softer shade of gray. Something in my chest ached, but it wasn't sadness, it was gratitude. When it was time to leave, I packed my small bag slowly. He didn't rush me. The air between us stayed gentle, like both of us understood that saying goodbye didn't have to mean ending anything. At the door I turned to him. Thanks for letting me stay. He smiled, one hand resting on the doorframe. Thanks for staying. I wanted to hug him, but I hesitated. He didn't. He stepped forward, arms wrapping around me in that steady, grounding way that only he could. For a moment I just breathed him in, memorizing the warmth, the texture of his shirt, the way his chest rose against mine. When we pulled back, he kept a hand on my shoulder. "Take care of yourself, okay?" "I will. And if you ever want to come back." "I know," I said. "I will." He nodded, eyes glinting in the morning light. "Good." I left then, walking down the stairwell that smelled faintly of dust and rain, out into the street where everything shimmered with sunlight. The city felt alive again, full of strangers and noise and promise. Halfway down the block, I looked up at his window. He was there, leaning on the sill, coffee mug in hand. When he saw me look, he raised it slightly, a silent goodbye or maybe something softer than that. I smiled, lifted my hand and kept walking. Every step away felt like carrying something I hadn't realized I needed, something light, like a secret that didn't hurt to keep. Maybe we'd see each other again. Maybe not. But that wasn't the point. What mattered was that, for a few days in a quiet apartment above the city, I'd been seen. I'd been met exactly where I was, and I'd found something that didn't need to last forever to be real. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for it. But I wouldn't undo it for anything.